Thank you. Hello again, everyone. Glad to have you here with us. I am Pranav Sharma, part of Gold Standard's technical team and a colleague of Martha's. So, as you well know, Gold Standard for the Global Goals requires all projects and activities to demonstrate direct and clear contribution towards SDGs, and with SDG 13 being mandatory in that requirement. As of now, project developers, and you would know it best, have been using their own approaches to claim SDG impact, which of course, in our view, is quite complicated to handle. And these sort of approaches are evaluated by VBs and gold standard during certification as well. These approaches are diverse, as I mentioned, wherein project developers essentially are using different to slightly different monitoring indicators to demonstrate essentially the same SDG impact, say for SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth. So citing this particular issue and situation and a host of other motivations that we have, and they will become abundantly clear as we move along with this presentation. Gold Standard has developed and put into force in the coming couple of weeks an SDG tool, which the project developers are required, and underline that required from that particular threshold date, which will come to later, to use it for identifying, quantifying, and monitoring all the SDG impacts that they are usually doing through their own different approaches, as I mentioned earlier. In the next half hour or so of this particular session, we shall be discussing the key elements of the SDG tool, including its structure, its scope, and applicability as well. And further provide a live short demonstration of the tool itself. We'll be shifting from the PPT to the spreadsheet format. And this is essentially to aid understandability and adoption amongst key stakeholders, which obviously is project developers, VVBs, and the like. So to start with, we just wanted to provide a brief introduction to the SDG tool. And as I've already mentioned, the Gold Standard has recently released the SDG tool, which essentially is or was built using the SDG tool guidance document, which was developed by Gold Standard and a host of other agencies, as you see in front of you, back in 2019. And this particular document provides guidance for a host of key stakeholders, which includes host party governments as well as standard bodies, to develop their own SDG tools. This can obviously be used by corporates and other organizations as well. So we have sort of built our SDG tool and designed it based on that tool guidance, and that tool guidance obviously is available on our website. You would also recall that the SDG tool is based solely on the requirements or the provisions in the paragraph 4.1.12b, or as we call it, option 2 of the principles and requirements documents, which alludes to an SDG tool being used as a valid means by project developers to assert their quantify or assert their SDG impacts. So this is essentially the genesis or the key idea behind the SDG tool. The SDG tool is a standardized Excel-based template, so it's available in a spreadsheet format, as is an ER tool, or emission reductions tool that project developers use. This particular template is meant to clearly and transparently monitor and report sustainable development impacts by project developers, alongside obviously SDG 13 or carbon reduction related impacts that are obviously mandatory. The tool again provides a stepwise approach, and this will become clear as we go on to the structure of the tool as well as discuss a live demo. So the stepwise approach, and there are steps 0 to step 5. So there are essentially 6 steps that this tool has. And all these steps are in effect used for identification, quantification, reporting of SDG monitoring indicators. This is obviously in line with gold standard for global goals, requirements, and procedures. So this is quite an important step that we've taken in this regard. The tool, obviously, as well, and this is something that we would like to underscore and highlight here, is meant to be used by all gold standard projects and VPAs, as well as CPS, irrespective of their scope, type, and scale. So all projects activities that are under gold standard requesting or under requesting certification under gold standard, or are currently registered under gold standard, would have to, in the next milestone, certification milestone, start using the SDG tool or demonstrate its use. The tool essentially focuses on positive impact reporting. So it's always taken in a positive sense or a contribution towards these SDG goals. It doesn't, for now, incorporate any negative impacts. And obviously, as you would know, the negative impacts from gold standard project point of view is taken care or assessed during the safeguarding principle assessment that is done for each project and activity. So right now we have an SDG tool which looks at the positive sustainable development impacts. We have a safeguarding principle assessment which looks at the negative impacts, so to speak. So these are two different schemes or two different approaches that we have, and both of them are mandatory and both of them are required to be assessed for each project slash activity. Just a point of note, the SDG tool and other supporting documents, which includes the manual, rule update, as well as other supporting documents are available on the GS website, and the link is provided on the PPT here. We will be obviously sharing this particular PPT with you along with other information. So moving on to the next slide, and this talks and speaks of the benefits that the variety of users would get from using the SDG tool. And this is essentially one of our key motivators that I've mentioned, and this in the which essentially sort of uh, inspired us to start developing and designing this tool and then releasing it publicly. So there are five benefits that we have identified, and we do hope and feel that this would be felt by various users, including project developers, TVBs, and us. So the first one is this tool will help to streamline the process of MRV of SDG benefits. This and it will sort of lead to an increase in efficiency of the whole reporting process, the MRV process, and also help reduce monitoring and auditing costs related to SDG impacts claims, which will sort of are in effect, we hope will help ensure that these impact claims are remain accurate and credible, and sort of same level that they were previously, and even to more to that degree. The SDG tool will also help uh, expand contributions to multiple SDG impacts. And as you would probably know that right now for all projects and activities, it is required that contributions be demonstrated for three SDG impacts, for three SDGs, and during certification. So if there are more than three impacts that a project sort of perceives that it can affect, then this SDG tool can be effectively used for that, and it's quite easy to do so. It will also enhance the communication of on various SDG contributions, and project developers can just use the results of the tool to sort of transparently report and in a compelling way visualize its SDG impacts and make it more attractive to potential end users and buyers of credits. So that is something that is to look forward to, and we hope that project developers do find that useful. Again, the SDG tool will also help standardize impact indicators, and the SDG tool uh, right now has more than 140 monitoring indicators, and these are obviously linked to various sustainable development goals. And these monitoring indicators essentially are heart of this tool, and these are essentially what are monitored and quantified under each project and activity. So we have a host of monitoring indicators which are standardized. So if you need to demonstrate impact towards a particular SDG goal, you would need a set or a standardized impact indicator that project developer would need to identify, monitor, and then quantify. So it's all provided in the tool, and you don't need to think extra in any way. But if you do need to, then obviously there is scope for adding new monitoring indicators as well, and we'll go to that later. Finally, the last benefit that we see, and it's more from a reporting point of view, is this tool will help aggregate SDG impacts for reporting at the portfolio level and help compare portfolio between different sectors. And this will obviously be useful for us from a standard side, and obviously for project developers who have a wide and a diverse portfolio of projects. So that will be very helpful. Moving on and talking about the structure of the tool currently has six worksheets that are mentioned in the extreme left. So we have the README worksheet, the impact assessment worksheet, the mapping worksheet, the BA worksheet, background and use case. Mapping, BA, and background worksheets are essentially quote unquote background worksheet that contain useful background information data that sort of feeds into the main tool. The README is the first worksheet that provides built-in instructions for the users of the tool, and they essentially provide stepwise guidance on how the end user can essentially use the tool. The impact assessment sheet is quite important, and this is the exact sheet that the end user would need to use to sort of interact with the SDG tool. And all the data and information needs to be provided in the impact assessment sheet that you would see. And the extreme right column that you see in this table essentially points out whether that particular worksheet requires user input or not. And as you can see clearly, the impact assessment sheet does need user input. All the other sheets are fixed and do not require user input, and these are just for guidance and looking at from a requirements, understanding requirements of the SDG tool. We'll look at the SDG tool during the at a more detail during our live demo. So for now, it suffices to say that the structure of the tool is it contains 6 worksheets, and the only sheet that project developers would at the end need to use is the impact assessment sheet. So moving on and talking about the use and applicability of the tool, and this we do realize is quite important, and we wanted to sort of highlight this particularly, and hopefully we would be for demonstrating our point, putting a point across here. And if you have any more doubts and clarifications, you can obviously reach out to us. But what we've done is we have segregated the use and applicability of the tool into 3 sort of areas. One is for new projects, the other one is the projects that are liable for CP renewal, and finally for all existing projects. And how the SDG tool should be used by these 3 category of project is essentially what's contained in this slide. So for all new projects, the use of the tool is mandatory if they are submitted for preliminary review and design certification review after 14th of March 2022. So in another 2 weeks or so. So all new projects that submit for preliminary review and design certification review after 14th of March this year would need to mandatorily use the tool. Again, all new VPAs included in to be included in existing POAs that are included after this particular date, which is 14th of March 2022, would also need to mandatorily use this tool and submit the filled and completed form of the tool along with all the project documents to Gold Standard. In terms of projects that are liable for CP renewal or crediting period renewal, the use of the tool again is mandatory for all projects that are submitted for design certification renewal after 14th of March 2022. So this date, 14th of March 2022, is quite important, and this should be considered as the threshold date after which the use of the tool is mandatory. Again, for all existing projects, the SDG tool application is optional and not mandatory. And this obviously for all the projects that are existing and certified under Gold Standard. For such projects, project developers may apply the tool on voluntary basis. So what they need to do essentially is make applicable changes in their monitoring plan to incorporate the tool itself and submit a design change request to Gold Standard. So this is essentially the brief process of how a project can shift from their own approaches to SDG assertion to using the SDG tool. Moving on and talking about the guidance that we wanted to communicate for project developers and how should project developers use this tool and how interpret this tool. So essentially, the PDs shall submit, as I mentioned, a completed sustainable development goal impact tool as part of the project documents, as I mentioned, and this should be done during requests for preliminary review, which is to sustain cert, request for validation and verification to VVB, and again during design and performance review to sustain cert. So these are essentially these 3 bullets that you see are essentially contain the certification steps wherein the SDG tool needs to be submitted. So it needs to be submitted during preliminary review in a completed form, during validation and verification, obviously, in a corrected form. If the project developer feels that it needs to update and add certain information during validation and submit it to validation and verification body, it can do so, obviously. And it also needs to submit it during verification, and it should be complete with all the information that is actual and not projected. For validation, obviously it can be ex ante, but for verification, it needs to be export, and it just needs to contain monitored and actual data. Again, same goes for design review. It can contain ex ante data for design review and submit the SDG tool through sustain set. For performance review, again, it needs to contain monitored and actual ex post data. So this is essentially how the SDG tool needs to be submitted to various players, stakeholders, and during various certification steps. Now, further guidance on a few key elements here for SDG 13, which is essentially climate change mitigation. And SDG 13, as you would know, the methodology, the steps to calculate SDG 13 are essentially contained in a particular methodology. The project developer shall carry out the detailed calculations for SDG 13 in the project document itself. So it should be done in the PDD or MR as it's done right now, and they should continue this process. They should essentially summarize their results of this details calculation assessment for SDG 13 in the tool. So SDG 13 related calculations are not required in a detailed sense in the tool. All the details should be included in the project document. For all other SDGs, detailed calculations should be provided in the tool, and results should be summarized in the projects document. So you can essentially pick out a summarized version of the tool for all other SDGs and copy paste that into the project documents, whether it's PDD or MR. Also, the project developer shall ensure completeness and accuracy of all information in the tool at every stage. This is true for all other elements of project design as well. So it holds true for SDG related assertion as well. And finally, the tool shall be updated each time and as applicable to include information and data that is relevant as per the certification step. So as I mentioned, during validation and design review, they can contain ex ante or projected data, but during verification and performance review, the data should be as actual and ex post. So as it is with any other monitoring indicator or monitoring parameter, it should be done with SDG related monitoring parameters as well. And I'm sure project developers would know that, and they just need to continue with the process that they are continuing, but use a different sort of mechanism to assert their SDG impacts. Moving on, and this slide contains guidance for VVBs, and this is something that we felt should be communicated by us essentially during this training. And if there are any questions and concerns regarding any of these two slides in particular, guidance for PDs and VVBs, we'll be more than happy to address those. You can reach out to us at the email IDs that we have been communicating during this training. So VVBs shall evaluate a project's proposed actual contribution towards sustainable development as they have been done in the SDG tool and project documents. In doing so, the VVB shall assess a bunch of key elements related to sustainable development assertions made by the project developer. And the table that you see in front of you essentially encapsulates and then segregates the assessment criteria or evaluation criteria based on validation and verification. So in some cases, the criteria is common. So the first three columns, rows that you see are criteria that the VB should follow, and they're common for both validation and verification. The last two are only for the verification. So in terms of the first one, the VBB should assess whether the SDG tool has been filled completely and accurately in accordance with the certification step. And this is in line with uh, any other requirement that we have and regarding filling of a particular project document template. So it's in the same vein as this. The VBB shall also, using a valid means at its disposal, assess the appropriateness of the established baseline scenarios for each of the SDG goals and impacts, and as well as evaluate the appropriateness of the impact quantification methods that the PD has proposed to calculate or assert SDG goal related impact. The VB shall also check whether all SDG impacts are intentional. This is a key and central requirement for from a GS point of view, that all SDG impacts need to be intentional as well as direct, and as a result of the implementation of the project. So this is something that needs to be taken into consideration by VVBs during their assessment, and VVBs would need to then provide their opinions as well in regards to all of these requirements. In terms of verification specific assessments, VVBs shall evaluate compliance of monitoring activities that the PDs have implemented as part of their established monitoring plan to assess SDG related impacts, and also look at whether the monitoring activities are in compliance with the methodology and other related requirements that gold standard has and might have in the future. Finally, the VVB shall also assess the suitability of all the supporting documentation that project developers have used, and assess whether the data and information that project developers have used in quantification their SDG related impacts are correct and the assumptions are appropriate, by using their own sectoral expertise and experience, as well as cross-checking with relevant sources that the PD has quoted, or any other external third party source that they can then look at. Finally, and this is obviously meant for the larger auditing process, the VB shall uphold all principles of auditing and implement appropriate means of validation verification during their assessment of SDG impact. So this is essentially comes to us from the central requirement for auditing any particular project related to gold standard global goals, and we should sort of use this as a guiding principle in assessing SDG related impacts as well. So hopefully this slide and the slide before this was useful for PDs and VVBs. If you have, as I mentioned, if you have any other questions and concerns, you can obviously reach out to us at the email IDs that we've just communicated before. So moving on, and we had discussed this briefly. As I mentioned, this SDG tool has around 142 monitoring indicators, which can be used to then link with various SDG goals and then claim impacts towards those goals. Uh, but it is not, they are not set in stone, and these are not sort of, the SDG tool doesn't limit itself to 142. We have created a provision for project developers to add and propose new monitoring indicators based on their project and what makes sense to them. So there is a process by which project developers can submit new monitoring indicators, and what they would need to do is they would need to fill in and complete a template for proposing new monitoring indicators, and this template is available on the Gold Standard website in the page of SDG tool, which is on the website. And you can also find the link on this particular slide here, which is in the underline. This particular template is also shown as a table on the right side of your screen. So essentially, this particular template contains information regarding that particular monitoring indicator that we should sort of assess during our assessment of whether this particular monitoring indicator needs to be included. And we do expect project developers to provide all relevant information regarding that particular monitoring indicator that they want to propose, which is not in the SDG impacts tool, that they would like to then propose and seek our advice on. So they would need to, in effect, include information regarding technology type of the related to that particular monitoring indicator, the SDG number, which obviously they can use from the various documents that are available online. SDG target that they are hope to the effect, monitoring indicator title, proposed monitoring approach, which includes information like measurement method, monitoring frequency, data units, QAQC procedures. This is sort of the all of the run-of-the-mill information that's required to form the monitoring plan or the monitoring approach. Also include justificability for it, justification for its applicability, and tell us how how that particular proposed monitoring indicator is essentially applicable here, and why this needs to be considered, and how the project developer then proposes to use that as part of the SDG tool. What they also will need to include is information regarding relevant source and references that they can provide related to that monitoring indicator. And all of this particular information as part of the template would then be used by Gold Standard to assess the suitability of including that new monitoring indicator. And we will obviously be reviewing all this information, and the proposed monitoring indicator, if everything goes well, will be then included into the rule on a rolling basis. So we right now are intending to include these monitoring indicators on a quarterly basis, so every 3 months. So we would be sort of including them in a batch right now. So that obviously depends on the volume of these proposed monitoring indicators that we're getting. So this essentially encapsulates this slide essentially encapsulate how project developers can affect proposed monitoring indicators. Again, if you have any questions and clarification, please feel free to reach out to us. Okay, again, moving on to where we see this tool in the next couple of years and more, and what is the evolution of the tool that we foresee. So there are two elements here. One, we are currently pursuing automation and digitization of the tool. So currently, as I mentioned, the tool is in an Excel spreadsheet format right now. But what we want to do is make it more digitalized and then also make it available online for seamless integration into Go Standards framework. So this tool essentially would then be integrated into our standards framework and can be more effectively used by various project developers for ease of convenience and adaptability. This is something that we are pursuing right now, and this is part of the Go Standards GSIQ initiative that we are, or the digitalization initiative that we are undergoing right now. The other point is that we want to expand the scope of the tool in the coming years, and to not just include project related assessment, but to also assess projects' contribution towards countries' NDCs and related objectives. So this is uh, more relevant for Article 6 point of view. So we sort of expanding the scope of the tool and making it compliant with various Paris agreements requirements. So that is as far as the PPT is concerned. I would now like to take you through to the tool and make a small demonstration. So hopefully you can see my screen. Martha, can you please confirm?
Yes, Kranav, we can see your screen. Maybe you can double click on home so that it's bigger.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so the screen in front of you, this is essentially what the tool looks like. So as you can see at the bottom, we have 6 worksheets here. So we have the README, we have the impact assessment, we have the mapping sheet, we have the BA sheet, we have the background sheet, and then finally we have the use case sheet. So all of these 6 worksheets form the structure of the tool as we have just discussed earlier. The README sheet contains stepwise guidance on how to use the tool, and is very descriptive and very graphic heavy, so for ease and convenience. So they contain this essentially contains stepwise guidance on how to use the tool, and the users and project developers can essentially use and go through this particular worksheet before using the tool. The other thing that the tool contains is the use case, which essentially contains a filled in SDG tool and how it should actually appear at the end of using the tool. So this is essentially gives a very good view of how to use the tool and how it should appear in effect. Uh, this contains a use case, and this would, I guess, be very handy for new project developers and people who are using this tool for the first time. What this tool also contains, as I mentioned, are 3 background sheets, so which are currently in red. So there's a mapping sheet which contains or provides mapping of various impact indicators with various SDGs and all of that. Then we have the BA sheet, which contains information regarding the project type and also information regarding various indicators. It contains impact areas, SDGs, SDG targets, and all important monitoring indicators, their description and guidance on how to calculate various monitoring indicators, which includes what data units should be prescribed, what source of data, measurement procedure, monitoring frequency. So it's essentially monitoring indicator, its description, as well as the monitoring plan is contained within this particular sheet. And this sheet obviously feeds into the main sheet, which is the impact assessment sheet. We also have a background sheet here, which provides a list of a lot of things that feed essentially into the impact assessment sheet. So we have project types, we have various impact areas / categories, we have the list of SDGs, project status, and then host of SDG targets and indicators. So these sort of lists and information essentially feed into the all important impact assessment sheet, which is this. So this is the sheet that the end user or the project developer would use to interact with the tool. So after you have gone through the README section and the use case, we suggest you come to this particular sheet, and this sheet essentially contains two types of cells. One is a light gray cell, which requires user input. So this particular cell that I've just selected, or maybe this cell, just an example. This also contains a dark gray cell, which contains a drop down. So for example, this project status is a drop down. Step one, this is a dark gray cell, which is also a drop down. So this essentially how the impact assessment sheet looks like, which is a mirror of the use case as I've just seen. And but this essentially obviously is empty. So I'll just take you through briefly on how to fill this. So we'll start with step O, which wherein we would provide the key project information. So here you can type the first thing that you need to type is essentially the project ID. So for example, 1111. We'll just keep it as a project. So POID is not applicable. We'll move on to the project status. In project status, we'll write, let's say it's a certified and a registered project. We'll type in a certified project. We would also now need to type in the crediting period date. So the crediting period start date as well as the end date. So let's say it is 1st January 2020, and we are assuming a 5-year crediting period to 31st December 2024. So this is essentially the first crediting period, which is of 5 years. We would then also need to type the various monitoring periods. So let's say we are doing an assessment for the first monitoring period. So we'll type in 1st of January 2020 and to 31st of December 2020. So this is a 1-year monitoring period. Uh, the crediting period date for new and listed projects should be expected dates. As you do when in the project documents, you need to replicate it. It doesn't have to be exact. But for certified project, these have to be obviously real dates. For the monitoring period data is only required for design certified project. So this is something that's worth mentioning and obvious as well. Now we move on to step one, wherein we would select the project type. So we have a list of 5 project types here. So we have renewable, community service activities, which are distributed projects, obviously, forestry projects, agriculture projects, and waste management projects. So for the sake of this particular live demo, we'll assume it is a improved cookstove project. So we'll hit the CSA category. That's done. For information regarding list of technology types, SDGs, and list of impact categories, you can hit these links here. And these links will take you to the BA or the background sheets where you can find for more information regarding your project type and what project type gold standard recognizes your project to be. Moving on to step 2, we need to then identify the preferred method for assessment. So we have a method where we would start with the impact category or start with SDG. So impact category or the first method is meant for those project developers that do understand what sort of SDGs their projects are linked with. So if they do have an understanding regarding that, they can select this. But for others, we suggest start with SDG for better understanding. So we, for the sake of this, would select this and start with the impact category. As you would see, this particular row number 23 is highlighted, and it's sort of automatically filled in this particular row. We'll move on to this particular drop down here and select now in step 2 the impact category. So let us say we want to select employment, and this particular drop down contains a list of a lot of impact categories. As you can see, so we have climate change mitigation, we have adaptation, air quality, soil quality, livelihood, gender. So all of these impact categories that a carbon project or a gold standard project can essentially affect. And these would be obviously be familiar with project developers and VVBs presently in this call. So let us say it's regarding employment. So we'll select the employment impact category, and then we'll move on to step number 3, which is selection of the monitoring indicator. So as you can see, we would need to select the topmost row here because we had selected the impact category. So we'll move up because in some cases it's not enough, not enough rows are filled in. So you probably need to move your cursor up. So let us say in terms of monitoring indicator, and as I've already mentioned, monitoring indicator for an SDG tool is the heart of the entire process, and this is something that you have to monitor and evaluate. So the monitoring indicator, let us say, is total number of jobs. And once you hit this monitoring indicator, you would see that step 4 has automatically filled in. Now, this step 4 is quite important. It provides guidance on the design, monitoring and reporting plan. And this essentially is the table or the monitoring table that the PDD or the MRs have. So this is the same. This is the same, but it contains quite a few pre-filled in information and data that the project developers would have to comply with. So this essentially step 4 contains monitoring indicator ID, a host of information regarding the indicator, the description of the indicator, which is in this case means refers to total jobs generated as a result of the project. And remember, our monitoring indicator is total number of jobs. We also have guidance on calculation method and other considerations and how the project developer needs to calculate this particular monitoring indicator. We also have information regarding data unit, source of data, and other measurement procedures and frequency. This is all, the elements are essentially the same as the elements of a particular monitoring plan table that PDDs and MRs have. So essentially the same thing, but it's filled in. So project developers, as you can see, you don't have to fill this information. It's filled in for you. You can just essentially use this information to design your project monitoring plan and then comply with this. So nothing nothing new has to be sort of thought of from this point of view. It's already filled in and provided. We again now move on to step number 5, where we'll carry out the project assessment. So in this case, we have a table here which will essentially will be used to calculate the SDG impact. So in this case, we have host of information that we need to plug in here. So as you can see in row number 50, we already have a pre-filled in monitoring indicator, which is total number of jobs. We have also provision to add in the data unit. So in this case, we can go up and see what the data unit is. And yeah, so here it says number, so we can easily just replicate that and write number here. Source of data can again be replicated from here, so we can write project activity. Essentially, be taken from this step 4 monitoring plan table here. We can then move on to the other element, which is monitoring frequency. So monitoring frequency in this case is annual, so we'll type in annual. Measurement procedure is the one contained here. And I'll just expand the row so that it's fully visible. So you can just copy paste this information here. I'm not going to do it because it's going to create space constraints. So I'll just move on to Q&QC procedures. In this case, there aren't any, so we can move on and leave this place blank or just write not applicable. Any other comment we can write in here and plug in. So after we have filled in this preliminary information, what we now need to do is provide the project specific information. So we will need to provide the baseline value for that particular monitoring indicator, which as you would remember is total number of jobs, the project value, and then the difference. So we'll assume that in the baseline value, there were no jobs. So we'll write 0 for 2020, as you can see. And please remember the monitoring period in this case was 2020 itself. Then we'll move on to the project value. So let us say the project has created 10 number of jobs. So we'll write 10 here. And the difference obviously will be 10. So this is the information that we need to put. What we also need to provide is the total. So again, we'll replicate the information above because it's total number of jobs. So 0, 10, and 10. And then net impact would again be 0, 10, and 10. So this is how essentially we use the tool and record all the information here and then ascertain the impact. You can also use this comments and further details section to add further information regarding that particular monitoring indicator. This this tool can obviously be used for other monitoring indicators as well. So you can essentially move on to the other table for other indicators. So let's say if you have done one for SDG 8, you need to do the other one for SDG 7, you can use the other table, then move on again, slide a cursor to the other table and maybe claim contributions towards SDG 3 and move on. So you can use all of these tables here. Right now there are 10 tables and we do not expect more than 10, to be honest. So this is essentially how the tool needs to be used. One thing that I wanted to mention here is that contribution towards SDG 13 or climate action is mandatory for all projects. And the first claim that needs to be made and the first table that needs to be filled should be for SDG 30. I've done that for SDG 8 for this particular assessment, but that was just for the live demonstration. When the project developers need to fill out this tool, they would need to first start with SDG 13 and then move on to, let's say, SDG 8 and SDG 7 and fill these tables uh, accordingly. So that is all I wanted to say. Thank you.